The most famous fact about Machu Picchu is that you have heard 1,000 times that the Incas built it without the wheel, without iron tools, and without written language. But any engineer who climbs those 2,400 meters will tell you that this explanation is nonsense. It hides more than it reveals. It merges comfortable myths with impossible reality and becomes a riddle wrapped in fog. We look at the postcards and see just a beautiful ruin on a mountain, but if you look closer, if you dig deep into the stones, instead of primitive simplicity, we will find things that don't fit in our understanding of ancient civilizations. Today, we will look through the terraces and find what historians tried to hide in the comfort of textbooks. We will see water systems that modern engineers still cannot replicate. We will find out how stones weighing 50 tons were lifted up a vertical cliff without cranes. We will discover the precision of cuts that even laser technology struggles to match. And we will understand why some blocks are literally vibrating with energy that instruments can detect, but science cannot explain. This city is not just a settlement, it is a gigantic mechanism, the purpose of which we begin to understand only now. In the late 1990s, when Peru began to restore large-scale remote areas of Machu Picchu, workers faced a problem that put engineers in a stupor. They had to replace a damaged stone in one of the temples to prevent collapse. They brought modern lifting equipment, hydraulic jacks, and laser measuring tools, thinking that the work would take a few days. This stone was more than 500 years old, but when they tried to remove it, nothing moved. They measured the gaps between the blocks. 0, not a millimeter. Not even a razor blade could fit between stones weighing tons. The joints were so perfect that no mortar was needed. The builders were shocked. They expected ancient masonry to be rough, with clay filling the cracks, but this material behaved differently. The more precisely they measured, the more impossible it seemed. It appeared that the Incas possessed technology that defied the laws of friction and gravity. As if time had not touched these stones at all, as if something was keeping them in perfect alignment. Of course, when workers told about it, locals immediately remembered the legends. People were convinced that the secret of such precision is dark magic. They said that ancient priests could soften stone like clay using plant extracts or sound vibrations. The origin of this secret was mixed with versions that the Incas got the knowledge of stone cutting from the same beings who built the pyramids, or those who came from the sky. How could ordinary granite blocks fit together with zero tolerance? It's just a contradiction to physics. But the answer was found not by ufologists, but by geologists, and it was not in myth, but in the mountain itself. Scientists from the University of Cusco took samples of these superstones and drove them through geological analysis. The result forced them to check the data twice. The secret ingredient that created zero-gap masonry was not magic, it was knowledge.
Regular knowledge of thermal expansion and rock crystallization. The Incas of the 15th century made a brilliant discovery. They understood that granite has a memory. From the point of view of geology, an amazing technique emerged. They would quarry stones during the dry season when the rock was cold and contracted. Then they would transport and place them during the wet season when temperature changes caused micro-expansion. This thermal masonry had unique properties. Over time, the stones settled and locked together tighter and tighter. The slight expansion and contraction created a self-sealing effect. It turned out a puzzle that grows more solid with age. This Inca engineering had properties that are not afraid of earthquakes. Ordinary mortar cracks, but these stones slide microscopically and absorb the shock. So Machu Picchu is essentially the biggest and most sophisticated stone puzzle in the history of architecture. But if thermal knowledge saved the city from earthquakes, then the next discovery made people believe in a real curse. Any guide at Machu Picchu will tell you a heartbreaking story about the workers who built the city. Thousands were conscripted from all corners of the empire. Years of labor in thin air at 2,400 meters. Many never returned home. After building palaces for nobles, they were buried in unmarked graves on the mountainside so as not to reveal the secret paths to the city. The workers died of exhaustion and altitude sickness, and their bodies were placed in the rocks so as not to dig graves in the sacred ground. This story has scared archaeologists for decades. People were afraid to excavate certain areas, believing that inside each terrace are skeletons of unfortunate laborers. Machu Picchu was whispered to be the most beautiful cemetery in the Andes. The myth of bones in the walls became so popular that it overgrew into a conspiracy theory. People claimed that the emperors did it on purpose. Allegedly, human sacrifice was required to appease the mountain gods, and the souls of the dead became eternal guardians of the city, which at night kept invaders away with their screams. Some shamans still walk along the terraces with offerings and incense, assuring that they feel colossal spiritual energy coming straight from the foundations. For them, Machu Picchu is a giant sacred tomb built on suffering. Archaeologists decided to check this terrible legend once and for all. They scanned and excavated many sites, and the scientific conclusion was clear. There is almost nothing. And it's not about ancient humanism, but about pure practicality. Any engineer will tell you that corpses inside masonry is a disaster waiting to happen. The body decomposes, creates voids, and the structure becomes unstable and collapses under its own weight. Building on corpses is like building a house on a swamp. It's stupid and unreliable. But it doesn't mean that people didn't die. They died by hundreds. Archaeologists found burial sites, but they were located at a safe distance from the main structures. Workers were buried in designated areas nearby so as not to compromise the construction. So the city is clean. It stands on stone, knowledge, and earth, not on bones. But if the engineers here achieved miracles of precision, then on the water channels they had to face a challenge that could not be solved by either stone or thermal expansion. There, they had to invent a technology that seems impossible even today. When we say Machu Picchu, the image appears of terraces climbing up the mountain like green stairs. This is the picture that tourists photograph. But if you go to the backside, to the hidden fountains and aqueducts, this image transforms into something else entirely. There are no visible pipes, no cement channels, and no metal valves. There is only water flowing uphill, and it's been flowing for 500 years. There are no pumps, no mechanical systems, and no electricity, and yet water flows there. Travelers who first discovered the fountain system often didn't understand what they were seeing. They saw water emerging from solid rock walls, cascading down 16 sacred fountains in perfect sequence. They thought these were natural springs carved by time. But if you measure the flow, you can see that nature doesn't create pressurized systems that pump water upward for hundreds of meters. This part of Machu Picchu is a real ghost of hydromic engineering. It looks like it should have stopped working centuries ago, but in fact it's been here for 500 years without maintenance. It's more reliable than modern city plumbing. And the most incredible thing is what it's made of. Locals have been studying these channels for decades, trying to understand how water can climb a mountain. After all, how can you make water climb a mountain?
People were convinced that the system here is connected with something supernatural which doesn't allow it to follow normal physics. The solution to this technology shocked modern hydraulic engineers with its simplicity and genius. The Incas were in a situation when they had nothing but stone, gravity, and understanding of pressure, and they invented the technology of the siphon network. They carved channels deep into the mountain, creating a system where water pressure from higher elevation pushed flow through underground passages. But there was one secret element that turned this system into a perpetual mechanism: filtration. Not just filtration, but a triple-layer purification system using gravel, sand, and crushed stone. The water entered the system from a spring 749 meters away, flowed through natural filters, and arrived at the city crystal clear and pressurized. It turned out to be a hydraulic masterpiece where gravity worked like a pump and stone filters like modern treatment plants. This system survived empires, earthquakes, and centuries of abandonment. But if engineers in the fountains fought against gravity, then on the agricultural terraces they had to cheat against nature itself. And what they came up with remained a mystery until 2015. Until recently, historians and agricultural experts considered the terraces a simple farming solution. It seemed that their only goal was to create flat surfaces on a steep mountain so crops could grow. This is logical. The more level ground, the more food you can produce. Tourists walking through the restored terraces see beautiful green steps, layer after layer climbing up. If you're farming here, you have space. If you're not, you starve. This simplicity was an axiom until ground-penetrating radar with ultra-high resolution appeared. In 2015, a team of researchers conducted perhaps the most detailed scan of the terraces in history. They took measurements layer by layer, creating a 3D model of what lies beneath the soil. And when they started studying the data, they noticed strange patterns in the terrace construction. In some places, the layers had changed composition. It looked like a geological cake, engineered very carefully. When the archaeologists excavated these places in person, they were stunned. It wasn't just farming platforms, it was climate control. More than 700 terraces, each one a separate microclimate zone, perfectly engineered for different crops. This completely turned our understanding of Inca agriculture. The terraces were not just places where they grew food passively, they were laboratories. When the Incas designed the terraces, they realized that different crops needed different conditions, so they created a layered system. The bottom layer was huge drainage stones to prevent waterlocking. The middle layer was gravel and sand to filter water and maintain temperature. The top layer was fertile soil mixed with specific minerals for each crop type. And each terrace was positioned to catch optimal sunlight and wind protection. It was a concept of agricultural engineering. The terraces were a giant experimental farm. They could grow tropical fruits at 2,400 meters and cold weather crops in the same complex by manipulating soil composition and drainage. This discovery showed how advanced Inca agricultural science was. They created different climate zones so precisely that we couldn't understand the system for 500 years. But there are things that were hidden not by humans. Some secrets of Machu Picchu are hidden by the mountain itself, creating a natural protective system. Look at the old photos of Machu Picchu taken in the early 20th century when Hiram Bingham rediscovered it. You will see ruins engulfed by the jungle. For a long time, archaeologists and restorers looked at it with anxiety. Many areas looked dirty, overgrown, and deserted. They were covered with vines, moss, and dense forest. Visually, this resembled nature reclaiming what humans abandoned. It seemed that the jungle was slowly but surely eating the monument of history, digesting it with roots and moisture. In the 1980s, a group of ambitious restorers had the idea to do perhaps the most large-scale clearing in archaeological history. The plan was simple: to cut all this vegetation mechanically, remove the trees, and expose the pure stonework. This seemed an absolutely logical step to save the UNESCO site. The workers' chainsaws were ready. But as soon as geologists took the first samples of soil stability and looked at the data, they screamed, "Stop!" It turned out that if they cleared the jungle, the city would slide down the mountain.
The vegetation that people had been taking for destructive overgrowth for decades was actually a crucial structural support, a living root system that held the entire city together. This jungle canopy worked as a modern reinforcement net that engineers use in landslide prevention, and nature created it for free. Research conducted on the terraces showed shocking figures. Areas covered with controlled vegetation turned out to be 4 times more stable than cleared stone. How does it work? The roots are not just surface cover, they are microscopic anchors. With invisible threads reaching meters deep, they were binding the soil and stone to a depth of several meters, creating a dense organic mesh. They literally stitched the mountain to the city. Moreover, these plants absorbed excess water during rainy season, preventing erosion and mudslides. It worked like a natural drainage system. The roots didn't allow rainwater to pool and destabilize the foundations. But at the same time, they allowed the stone to breathe and prevented rot. The canopy protected the terraces from torrential rains, which carried debris with force and worked like battering rams. Without this living stabilizer, the rainy season would wash the entire city into the valley without leaving even the foundation. Machu Picchu literally grew a protective shield to survive in its extreme location. It formed an alliance with the jungle. This discovery completely overturned restoration philosophy around the world. Now, selective vegetation management is treated as carefully as the ancient stones themselves. Any attempt to completely clear the site is now considered vandalism. But if the jungle was saving the city from mudslides, then the next technology protected the entire complex from destruction by invisible forces. After all, Machu Picchu was not just a city, but the most sophisticated seismic dampening system in the ancient world. Let's move on to 1450. You are a stonemason, finishing the Temple of the Sun. There are only granite blocks, precise measurements, and silence. Suddenly, the ground begins to shake. In Europe at that time, it would mean inevitable collapse. Stone buildings would crumble, people would be crushed, the city would become ruins. But at Machu Picchu, the earthquake passes and nothing falls. Not a single stone displaced, not one wall cracked.
The city absorbs the shock like it's breathing. The Incas knew about earthquakes. Peru sits on one of the most active seismic zones on Earth. But they learned not just to survive quakes, but to dance with them. The secret was revealed in a technique called ashlar masonry, which stood at the foundation of Machu Picchu's earthquake immunity. It was the first in the world earthquake-proof architecture system. Only instead of flexible steel, Incas used dancing stones. But forget what you think you know about construction where rigid foundations are king. This was not just stacking rocks, it was the most complex anti-seismic engineering, a real 3-dimensional puzzle for which each mason was responsible with his life. The builders used interlocking stone technique. Each block was carved with slight inward angles and irregular shapes that nested together like a 3D jigsaw puzzle. Why this exact shape? Scientists spent decades wondering whether the irregular polygonal pattern was aesthetic choice or structural necessity. But historical evidence and modern seismic testing insist it was pure engineering genius. The interlocking angles meant that when an earthquake struck, the stones could shift microscopically, moving, adjusting, absorbing energy, and then settle back into position. It was architecture that moved with the earth instead of fighting it. They didn't just build rigid walls, they built flexible ones. The walls could sway slightly during a quake, dissipating energy through the micro-movements between stones, and then return to perfect alignment. But the technique only worked during construction season. The Incas had to carve and place stones during specific times of year when temperature and humidity were optimal for the final fit. And if the placement was critical, sound was used. Priests would strike stones with special hammers. By listening to the resonance, they could tell if a stone was properly seated. Imagine this precision. The knowledge was passed from mason to mason in a chain. One master would train apprentices for years. In a month, his student would begin working on real structures.
In a year, that student could identify a poorly placed stone just by sound. A wave of knowledge flew across generations faster than any written manual could teach. The emperor in Cusco could sleep without worrying about earthquakes because the stones themselves were the shock absorbers. This system worked for centuries. It turned thousands of individual blocks into a single organism with instant structural response. It seemed that such a system could not be defeated because earthquakes had nothing that could break it. But history teaches us one cruel lesson. The most brilliant structures, equipped with the best anti-seismic technology, fall not from earthquakes and not from erosion. They fall from abandonment. Machu Picchu was completed around 1450. It was the most expensive, most remote, and most sacred project in Inca history. Decades of labor, thousands of workers, exhaustion of resources, all for one single purpose: to create a royal estate and sacred complex that would stand forever. Engineers invented thermal fitting, created hydraulic systems, built earthquake-proof walls and climate-controlled terraces. And so, in the beginning of the 1530s, the city was abandoned by its own people without a fight. According to all logic of human behavior, they should have defended it. This was the crown jewel of the empire, a sacred site blessed by the sun god, reachable only by those who knew the secret paths. The city should have been protected until the last person standing, but it didn't happen. The Incas walked away from it like ghosts fading into the jungle, left Machu Picchu empty and silent. How did this happen? Did the stones crack and the city became unstable? Or did invaders find the hidden trails? No, the truth turned out to be more prosaic, cynical, and terrifying in its simplicity. No one attacked Machu Picchu. There were no great battles at the gates like Hollywood shows. The Spanish conquistadors, being not only brutal warriors but also carriers of invisible weapons, brought smallpox to the Inca Empire. The disease spread faster than any army could march. It killed the emperor, decimated the population, and shattered the social structure that maintained places like Machu Picchu. And the people who maintained the city, the farmers, the priests, the water engineers, they were either dead or fleeing the plague.
The city didn't fall to swords. It fell to silence. The terraces had no one to tend them. The fountains had no one to maintain them. The sacred fires went out. And slowly, carefully, the jungle moved in and wrapped the city in a green embrace, hiding it from the world for 400 years. This is what historians call the paradox of Machu Picchu. You can build the most perfect city in the world, use brilliant engineering, construct everything with earthquake-proof masonry, and protect it with isolation. But all this becomes a useless pile of stones if the people who give it life disappear. Machu Picchu was an ideal architectural achievement, but it depended on humans, and humans are fragile. Disease, conquest, the collapse of empires, these are the forces that no stone can resist. The city intended to stand for eternity eventually played a cruel joke. It survived because it was forgotten. The isolation that made it sacred also made it invisible to Spanish conquistadors who destroyed every other Inca site. Machu Picchu slept in the clouds, wrapped in jungle, waiting. We started our journey with the popular myth that the Incas built without wheels or iron, and ended up with a truth that is much more complicated and beautiful than any simple explanation.
We saw that Machu Picchu is not just a dead pile of ruins scattered across a mountain. This is a complex technological artifact. This is geology where thermal expansion became stronger than modern mortar. This is clever hydraulic engineering with fountains that flow without pumps. This is an agricultural masterpiece made of layered terraces that create different climates. This is living structural support where jungle roots protect against landslides. And this is dancing architecture that moves with earthquakes instead of breaking.
But the most important discovery we made today concerns not the stones, but the meanings. The city, created at 2,400 meters to touch the sky, to say we can build where gods live, eventually became a symbol that humbles everyone who climbs its steps. Every year, millions of tourists of different nations, languages, and beliefs rise to Machu Picchu. They touch these stones and feel the same thing. They tremble before human ambition. The city did not fulfill its eternal purpose. The empire fell anyway. The people vanished. The jungle reclaimed it. But it fulfilled a purpose its builders did not even think about. It preserved the memory of what people can achieve when they refuse to accept impossible. And perhaps, standing on the sun gate and looking at the city emerging from morning fog, we should think neither about abandonment, nor plague, nor about conquest. We have to think that even the most magnificent cities that we build to challenge heaven will once lose their people and become bridges to the past. And this is probably the most important lesson that Machu Picchu teaches us.